Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi o Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Kia ora everyone, it's David Downs here from the New Zealand Story Group. Very lovely to have so many of you joining. We're having people flooding in over the next few minutes, but I wanted to say welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. Given it is Māori Language Week and it's very much part of our role here at New Zealand Story to think about how Māori culture is played out in our work. I'll start with a karakia, mō karakia tātou. Toia te ata hāpara, kia kū te whenua, kia hoho te pitamata o mahara tū whakarere. Pū mai te kōrero e te hau aio, e te hau māreno, ngā ehe te ehihi, ngā ehe te wanawana, o te kūra wānanga, o te kūra tāpū, kora ki te awaha. E te wai ko manawa hō te rongo, hō te kōrero, tau mai te mauri, haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. This beautiful karakia was written for us, especially at New Zealand Story recently by Scotty and Stacey Morrison. So a beautiful piece of poetry, as you can see there, talking about the importance of stories and how they come to life for all of us. So thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. As mentioned, my name's David. I'm one of the presenters today. I've got the easiest job, actually. I just basically kick it off and let the experts do their thing, and then I'll come back for Q&A later. But joining me shortly will be Amy Knightley, the Marketing Director from New Zealand Story, and our great partner, Josh Thomas-Goody from 55.5, who've done a lot of the research. So the three of us will take you through what the data is telling us, what the international research is telling us. This is a big piece of work. Quite a comprehensive analysis on New Zealand's reputation in multiple dimensions. We'll talk about that shortly. So really looking forward to sharing it. As always, our content is available for download on our toolkit, the New Zealand Story Toolkit. So make sure you go there after the seminar is finished and have a look. So here's what we're going to cover. 4 sections. I'll give a quick overview of New Zealand Story for those of you who might not have heard of us and what we do. And then Amy will take us through a thing called the Global Soft Power Instrument. It's basically a set of insights from a very large quantitative survey, many tens of thousands of people around the world. And then from that, we have built a survey to do more qualitative information. And that's what Joshua will take us through. That's the Market Pulse Research Insights. So digging deeply into what the big picture data is telling us. We're digging deeply into a few markets and going and asking a bit more information, a bit more of the why people think what they think. And then, as mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A. Now, the Q&A we're using is going to be at the bottom of the screen here. For those of you who have used Zoom, you'll know it very well, but there's a Q&A function down the bottom. My suggestion is don't wait till the end to put your questions in. Put them in as they occur to you, and we'll build up a bit of a bank. And then at the end of Josh's presentation, I'll come back with Amy and Josh, and we'll go through those questions. So put them all the way through. Let me tell you a little bit about New Zealand Story. We're hopefully you know of us already, but we're a government agency. We exist as almost a joint venture of other government agencies. So essentially, you can see all the agencies down the bottom. There's some new entrants in that list. Invest NZ, for example, was one of our new partners. So essentially, those agencies are the ones that think about New Zealand's international reputation, and collectively they own us, if you like, or they have put together this joint venture. And we tell the story of New Zealand. We promote, we protect, and we enhance the brand of New Zealand globally. And you can see there we have the Fernmark License Program. We have a number of reference groups and advisory groups that help us out with our work. But essentially, we're here to promote New Zealand to the rest of the world. And an important part of promoting to the rest of the world is to understand what the world already thinks about New Zealand. So that's part of what we're going through today. It's one of the offerings that we have from New Zealand Story. This is sort of the concrete parts of our offering. So we have a toolkit of graphics and beautiful imagery. As I said earlier, you can download content from that toolkit, including the research report that we'll go through today. We do a lot of content creation ourselves, so telling stories, showcasing case studies, that sort of thing, which go out into the world and promote New Zealand. Research today is a really good example of what we've got there, but we've got in-depth reports from over many years in terms of global perceptions of New Zealand. So what other countries think about New Zealand. We do a lot of work in partnership space, helping things like major events when they come to New Zealand, big trade missions and inwards VIP visits, that sort of thing. And then very importantly, and I'll tell you more about this later, but the Fernmark program, this beautiful silver fern that's behind me at the moment, is a trademark for New Zealand. We manage the program around licensing that trademark to others. So if you're interested and you would like to get on a program that proves your provenance, proves that you're from New Zealand, that's the way to do it. We'll tell you more about that later. But country branding, as I mentioned, that's kind of our core reason for being, is thinking about the brand of New Zealand globally. And it really matters. Countries like New Zealand, small advanced economies, our reputation is critical for our international success. It helps us attract talent, investment, helps makes our products and services more desirable and more valuable. You know, a product from New Zealand is perceived as having a higher value. And of course, it strengthens relationships in diplomatic circles as well. So these are the reasons why we focus on building New Zealand's global reputation. And when we do that, we know that we lead to having a brand, a strong brand, a valuable brand for the country. As you can see there, nearly 300 billion US dollars worth of value is the New Zealand brand. And that brand is therefore accrues value to all of the exporters, all of the services industries and people from New Zealand. When you go internationally, you get the halo effect of this very, very strong and valuable brand. And so today what we're doing in the research is going into a bit more detail on what do others think about us in more fine-grained detail. But overarching the whole thing is this knowledge that New Zealand's brand is one of our strongest international attributes. And with that, I'm going to bring in my colleague, Amy Knightley. Amy is our Director of Marketing and Communications, has done a great job. It's her team that pulls this index together and this report together. So I'll hand over to you, Amy.
Well, thanks, David, and kia ora koutou, everybody. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Global Soft Power Index at a high level. The annual Global Soft Power Index is produced by Brand Finance, and it's one of the world's most comprehensive studies on the perceptions of nations' brands. The research surveys over 170,000 people in over 120 countries around the world on the perceptions of 193 member states of the United Nations. And we use the Global Soft Power Insights to help us understand what perceptions consumers are thinking about New Zealand from around the world. So a busy slide coming up, but it helps to give context. So the Global Soft Power Index ranks countries by evaluating their reputation and their influence. The term soft power refers to how nations can shape the preferences of others through appeal and attraction, as opposed to through coercing or through hard power. So increased soft power positively impacts a place brand's performance, resulting in increased economic growth and place brand value. So there's 3 KPI metrics in the study. Those include familiarity, reputation, and influence. And then there's 8 pillars that cover things like business and trade, international relations, culture and heritage, and governance. And under each of those pillars, there's different nation brand attributes that they measure. So now to New Zealand's performance on this index. As cliche as it is, we punch above our weight, which is great. We currently rank 25th out of 193 nations on the Global Soft Power Index, and that's increased from 26 in 2024. We also rank 14th for our country's reputation, which is one of those key KPI metrics. And since 2024, you'll see down there in the light blue is recommendation. This is a new metric from Brand Finance, and it measures the willingness of respondents to recommend countries as a place to invest in, a place to buy products and services from, a place to work and study in, as well as a place to visit. Again, we rank 14th in that metric, which is amazing. Our relative strengths as a nation, of course, are that strong recommendation and that strong ability for people to recommend us, but we also have strengths within the different pillars. So for example, within business and trade, we are seen as having a strong and stable economy. Within governance, we are considered to be politically stable and well-governed. Under culture and heritage, we are seen as being a great place to visit. And under education and science, we are seen as having a strong education system. The Global Soft Power Index also analyses and reveals the specific pillars and how important they are across the different KPI metrics and across the different sectors, e.g. invest, work, etc. What we can see on this slide here is that business and trade is the most important driver across all those KPIs and sectors, with the exception of visitation. Culture and heritage is also critical, especially in visitation, and governance is a key driver for investment after business and trade. So maintaining and improving perceptions across these pillars will really help with our export growth. So we know from these insights that there are areas where we can improve perceptions, and that we also have these areas of strength that we can leverage in our international storytelling and in our marketing. So our strategic opportunities include improving perceptions of science, technology, and innovation and of space. And we know we have some wonderful stories that we can share with the world around those things. In addition to that, we can also improve perceptions of our products and our brands, our food and our arts and our entertainment. So as I mentioned earlier, the Global Soft Power Index helps us understand what consumers are thinking, but we use the Market Pulse study, which is the qualitative study, to understand why behind those GSPI insights. In 2023 and 2024, we explored the soft power drivers of science, tech and innovation, space and sustainability, and that report is available to download from our toolkit. This year, we've explored 3 other metrics. We've explored rich heritage, which is from the culture and heritage pillar. This is not as key to driving reputation and influence as the other 2 that we've explored are, but it's really important because it underpins our uniqueness as a nation. We've explored influence in arts and entertainment, which is a key driver of reputation and influence, and that is from the culture and heritage pillar as well. And finally, we've explored products and brands the world loves, also an important driver of reputation and influence, and under the business and trade pillar. So just to recap, the Market Pulse study is a qualitative study that was in field in April 2025. And there's 2 key objectives for this research. The first is to provide an understanding of how consumers are feeling about their own nations and how this has changed since our last research, as well as understanding how they perceive New Zealand at a general level. The second is to provide that in-depth understanding of how New Zealand is perceived on these 3 nation brand attributes that I just covered, and how these perceptions are informed. So as David already mentioned and I mentioned, it's really seeking to understand the why. Why do consumers hold these perceptions? This in turn, when we understand what we need to do, say, and show, it helps us shift those perceptions and has the potential to improve economic outcomes through being more influential on the global stage. And with that, I'll now hand over to Josh, who will dive into the Market Pulse insights.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. Hello, thanks for tuning in. It's great to work on another piece of this study with the team, Amy and David and the guys there. It's great to kind of dig into this more. So thanks for heading over. I will take us through for the next hour or so the insight that we've found and uncovered. And as Amy's given you a great background there as to what we've understood and why we've kind of endeavored to do some qualitative research. I suppose a little bit of, some of the fundamentals as to what we've done, just for anyone who's not familiar. This is qualitative research, not quantitative research. So the Brown Finance study that Amy referenced is very large scale, quantitative, huge numbers of people responding to surveys. And that gives us the what. But qualitative research is smaller conversations that what they lack in breadth, they make up for in depth. So we're able to really get under the skin of these issues and really get a better sense of I suppose, the sentiments, and really kind of unpick what it is that informs these soft power metrics, perceptions of New Zealand, and how we perform on it. So as Amy mentioned, 21 groups across the 7 markets. Obviously, that comes with some limitations in terms of region, that sort of thing, but it gives us the real depth that we're looking for to help better understand ultimately what people are thinking, why they think it, and hopefully some direction on so what and where, and how do we action that, what do we do about it. So that's as you can see on the slide here, the shape of what I'm going to take you through. The first part of our objectives is obviously taking the tone of each of those markets. Where are those consumers today in terms of their place in the world, how confident they're feeling, and so on. Then we're going to unpick those soft power metrics and how they come to life in people's minds. So understanding why people answer those surveys that Amy mentioned in the way that they do with regards to different nations, what that means for New Zealand and where we stand today, and then some so what and what can we start to do about that. So that's the shape of today, and I'll start with the market mood. Now, a bit of a backdrop to when we did this work. Obviously, a little different from 2023 when we last did a study. The world moves on, the news cycle moves on very, very fast. So the context as to when we had these conversations early in the year is really important to be aware of. So firstly, I suppose, is that we'd had a lot of elections in our key markets that were quite consequential. So we had one in the US, which you may be aware of, has obviously been quite consequential, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But also the UK had an election, change of government from 15 or so years of Conservative government changed over to Labour. India had an election at around the same time, still Modi's party in power, but obviously a little bit of a change there, who anyone who was following that will be aware of, and not quite so much consolidation of power as has been the case before. Elections in Australia and Singapore also, although with less change there. We're also seeing violent populism. I mean, we've seen it in the last week in the US, but there's been quite a bit of that in the news cycle in America in particular, as kind of widening kind of political divide and ideologies continue to fracture. War, unfortunately, as well, a big key backdrop, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan. Also, just as we were doing the field work, the kind of skirmishes on the border of India and Pakistan were unfolding as well. So obviously that's on a lot of people's minds, and many of these nations questioning what's our role and how involved should we be in this is a little bit of a challenge as well. The rise of AI continues to be on people's minds. So there's a sudden acceleration of capabilities. Lots of people kind of questioning what that means for the economy and what it means for people's jobs, but also the bigger kind of narrative and another kind of territory or divide between particularly US and China, and who's kind of owning that advantage in the economic arms race of AI and what that might represent as well. Very much from a consumer perspective, economic turmoil and stress, uncertainty, modest growth in most of these economies, inflation, recessions, and we're feeling that here, the cost of living crisis in New Zealand, but it's very much the case in these markets as well. So a lot of uncertainty and kind of concern there from everyday consumers around cost of living and the future. And then, of course, the climate crisis. We had the LA wildfires pretty soon, if I remember correctly, quite near to when we did these groups. Hurricanes, it was the hottest year on record in 2025, and a sense amongst consumers that this isn't going away, it's worsening, but there's not a lot that's being done about it by government. So that's the backdrop of these conversations. Now, if we look very quickly market by market, and this is a story I'll give more detail to in just a moment, really the story is largely one of, I suppose, American behavior, uncertainty, reassessment of the global standing, political changes at home, but obviously geopolitical kind of impacts across the world. So a lot of kind of self-reflection in the conversations we had in the US. I mentioned this as qualitative research. We did our groups in New York and Los Angeles. Understandably, that might have been different, the tone and the sentiment there, had we done that in different parts of the country. But as it was in those kind of entry points for New Zealand businesses, the sense is one of unease and kind of reflection as to what's happening in the country there. And it has knock-on effects, as we'll see. In the UK, compared to 2023, we did see a greater sense of reflection given the change of government there after a long time of Conservative rules. Well, we've got some expectations now. We have a new government. We've been through an extended period of underinvestment. We want to see some change here, and questioning whether that's really actually bearing out or not. So a lot more kind of inward focus in the UK than we saw in 2023. In Australia, I guess a sense of relief, ultimately, that they're kind of out of the way of a lot of the wranglings, a lot of geopolitical conflicts and that sort of thing, and a sense that, not a great deal has changed, but at least we're not kind of embroiled in some of the turmoil that is going on elsewhere in the world. On the other side, I suppose in the Eastern markets, what we see, I suppose the counterpart to the US is China. And we'll see again in more detail in just a moment on some of these charts around China, is that there's a real steely resolve. So despite the kind of pressures, the tariff wars and that sort of thing, there's a sense that the country's been preparing for this, building its I suppose, sense of stability, self-sufficiency, that sort of thing, and ability to weather these kind of challenges. Next to that, I suppose we've got India, which is another kind of, I suppose, a nation that sees optimism in this conflict and turmoil, a sense that they're on the up, and any kind of challenge to China from the West represents an opportunity for India to step in. And there's leadership, there's skills, and opportunity for India to kind of fill in any gaps that might be voided by China. Singapore, similarly to Australia, there's a sense of relative neutrality in the nation in terms of the geopolitical kind of relationships, sense of stability, a bit of a bridge, plays the role of a bridge between East and West, and there's a sense of stability in that. And then lastly, Japan, There's some degree of concern around insularity and whether actually, the insular kind of behavior of the country that served it so well for so long might be in the global kind of, or at least regional kind of issues and political challenges that might be unfolding in future. Maybe there's a chance, or a need rather, to strengthen political and cultural connections more so than they perhaps have. So let's look very quickly at each of these markets in a little bit more detail. We'll start with America. And this, bear in mind, this is, again, as I said, in key coastal cities, we had these conversations. And this is very much in the words and the sentiments of the people we spoke with. So you've got over the top there, innovative, regressing, uncertain, and inequitable. These are the kind of words that essentially sum up the vibe, the feeling in these conversations that we had. So still feeling innovative as a country, driving the world's kind of innovation in tech and culture, sports and so on. Still a very important cultural influencer, geopolitical influencer, and for better or worse, an influence on geopolitics in one way or another, more unlike any other. So remains a benchmark in that sense. What we've got in red, though, those words are I suppose, sentiments that are rising and are problematic or seen as problematic. So a degree of regression here. So, from being the traditional global leader, there's a sense that actually that leadership is a little bit uncertain, and they felt to be losing some of their moral leadership on the world stage. A great deal of uncertainty as to what the future holds, both in the short term of the current administration and what might come in the next few years of that, but also what follows from that. What's the next administration? Is the current kind of drama and stress and challenging of rights and that sort of thing, is that the new normal in America? So lots of kind of questions being asked there. And then the last piece is inequity. We saw, lots and lots of conversation, as we heard in 2023, about the ever-widening gap between haves and have-nots, lowering and worsening standards of welfare, healthcare, education, and so on. So lots of kind of concern, unfortunately, in America in the conversations that we had. The flip side of that, you can see lots of green here, is China. So as we heard in 2023, there's a sense that China is really arriving on the world stage as a superpower, and that felt even more significant, even stronger in 2025 when we had these conversations. A really sense of not just we're arriving, we have arrived essentially. We've made significant leaps in development towards developed nations status, lots of investment in infrastructure, transport and that sort of thing, really accelerating, continuing in new frontiers, AI, that sort of thing as well, and obviously EVs and many other sectors. Huge investment in things like sustainable energy generation, giving a real sense of stability and independence, a great sense of confidence, ultimately, despite the kind of challenges, or at least narrative challenges from the US and other nations that China is sort of kind of the enemy. There's a sense that actually we can weather this in China, and we're well prepared, we're well set up for it. And then underestimated, again, we heard this a lot last year, a sense that ultimately, the nation's underestimated by the West, and actually there's a lot more capability, a lot more development than people give credit for. Okay, excuse me. If we look at Britain, then I mentioned we'd had there'd been an election in the UK at around this time, or shortly around this time. Look, there's a lot of kind of pride in the UK in terms of areas of excellence that people, believe that the UK really leads in still. So pride in sectors such as the arts and design, fashion, that sort of thing, entertainment, education, healthcare, sources of great pride, a great deal of heritage in the nation that's central to the identity of the UK. But there is uncertainty, and similar to the US, there is a sense of regression, things not being done. So uncertainty as to what comes next after a decade and a half of austerity. What's the real trajectory of the country? People wanting to see what that really looks like and actually see some meaningful action. Perception about underfunded services, schools, healthcare, infrastructure, and not seeing the hoped for investments straight away with the new government. So there's a question there. And then, of course, conflicts, post-Brexit identity, relationship with Europe, and obviously changing relationships with allies, the US, that role with Europe and the role with, what's doing Ukraine and how involved to get, that sort of thing, are really kind of making people ask questions about what is our role and where do we go from here as a country. So lots of question marks there, real kind of at a potential turning point, I think. In Australia, as I said, not so many ups and downs as some of the other markets. You can see those words in black, represent relative stability, and you can see that green word is a real strength there. So the sense that we are stable in Australia, consumers feel stable. The quality of life is very high. It's an equitable, well-developed country. It's a stable democracy, so doing very well in comparison to other nations. Seen as being very capable. There's lots, again, may not be as well known as some other countries, but there's a lot of sense of pride in what Australia can achieve, scientific and technological innovations and that sort of thing. A sense of real luck. They've got a large nation with great deal of, economic resources, mineral resources, that sort of thing, high demand for investors, for business, for tourism, and they're lucky to have that. But a sense of stagnancy, a nation that, despite all its strength, doesn't really lead in any one real clear way. So a sense that, they're a nation that's happy to follow more so than lead. Not necessarily a negative, but not perhaps the strength that it could be for all the skills and wealth in the nation. If we talk to Singapore now, again, you can see here lots of green, so lots of positives, lots of strength and security and stability in Singapore. A sense that, it's an innovative nation, tech-driven, future-ready. Anyone who's visited will see that in the development of the city. So strong momentum in things like AI, action in terms of climate, sustainability, smart city development, that sort of thing. A great deal of cohesion. So, a culturally diverse city, but celebrates that kind of diversity and that kind of that exists in a really cohesive manner. So there's a real sense of kind of a strong social fabric in Singapore. There's a real strength. Again, sense that it's trusted. Plays a nice diplomatic role between East and West, has relationships across the world, and has respected leadership in key industries, finance, tech, and the like. Although a little bit of sense of strain, a little bit of sense that maybe there are some kind of infrastructure challenges, there is a little bit of growth and inequality, and that might be a threat to the future. But compared to some of the other nations where we heard that kind of feedback, far less stark than some of those other nations. Couple more. India, we've got a bit of green and a bit of red here. So I suppose a little way behind China in terms of their progress, but a great sense that there has been really positive progress made in many ways, digitizing the economy, increasing manufacturing. I think the Apple iPhone manufacturing some of that was being moved to India at the time. People were talking about how proud they are of that and what a showcase it is in terms of India's capability, infrastructure boosting the economy and that sort of thing. So a real sense of momentum and progress here in India. There is a sense that it's becoming more and more influential. Modi positioning India as an alternative to China, as I mentioned, and an opportunity potentially opening up there, as China's maybe pushed aside by the likes of the US. Lots of talent emigrating worldwide that people are proud of. People talking about, Satya Nadella and other people in positions of tech influence around the world. Shows, people that, this can be achieved by Indian people. That can be an influence in important sectors. Very unified as well for a nation of that scale. Anyone who knows about India's history and the scale and complexity and diversity of the country. So, despite all of that, it's a very unified country in a lot of ways. And there's a rich heritage that the nation is collectively proud of showing to local and foreigners alike. But of course, challenges remain. It's not, there's still a great deal of poverty, safety, there are still deeply rooted social attitudes that could be improved towards women and other groups as well. So there is recognized challenges to overcome still, but a sense that the nation is moving into a really positive space in a positive direction. Lastly then, if the slide will move on. There we go, is Japan. So how do they see themselves? Well, a lot of pride really in what they, I suppose, have instilled as their culture, their strengths, quality and craftsmanship, a sense of a nation that does things really properly. Craftsmanship, innovation in manufacturing, in tech has led to a sense of real global respect there. That's really closely tied, and we'll see that throughout the conversation that I'm going to take you through shortly, is tied to that culture, that heritage and that tradition, and a culture that has a balance of tradition and modernity clashing to provide something or create something that's very, very unique and recognized and valued in the world. Seen as very safe, people very, very safe living in Japan, and we're very, very proud of that. It's a clean, harmonious nation, lots of reliable infrastructure. That means that that's not something that people need to be concerned about. And lastly, just a little bit of challenge, which probably won't be a surprise to anyone. There is obviously a challenge in Japan around aging population, work-life imbalance, and the kind of extreme working culture that exists in Japan raises some concerns about competitiveness, the future of the country, ability to pay for that aging generation, and so on. So there is a sense that there's challenges on the horizon domestically. So a bit of a summary here. I won't talk through all this. The words on the top row there are those words that we've seen on the charts before. And then those in yellow and green below are, I suppose, areas that New Zealand Story like to check in on every, I suppose, as a benchmark year on year when they do these studies. That's a sense of influence, connection, and aspiration. And I think largely that tells the story of where we're at in 2025 with these nations. You see on the left there with the USA, you see some red words there that represent rising challenges or issues, and we see the influence, connection, and aspiration that are still very strong, but actually potentially declining a little bit. You see those red arrows indicating that influence, connection, and aspiration are starting to wane or change to, I suppose, a more negative degree of influence. And then the inverse of that is China, where we see influence and connection growing, and similarly India, influence and connection growing as a result of largely of US's behavior. Excuse me. And I suppose return on the investment that China and India are making into their economies and infrastructure and so on and so forth. So that's how nations see themselves in 2025. Excuse me. So the next part of our challenge here was to understand our soft power metrics, the three that Amy talked about at the beginning in the introduction. Now, this is obviously a summary that we're taking you through today. There is a lot more depth, I suppose, showing our working, how we got to what I'm about to show you. The evidence and all that sort of stuff that people talk to us about and that we've kind of unpacked and landed on what I'll talk you through now. So if you want to get more detail and maybe understand the kind of thought process that's lands us to where we're sharing today, download the toolkit and you'll be able to find all of that and go through that in greater detail. But we're going to look at each of these in turn. I'll start with rich heritage. But what we tried to do, and we did this in the 2023 work, if anyone is familiar with that, what we tried to do was understand some key indicators when people are thinking about these nations and they're asked to answer the questions in the Brand Finance survey. Rank these countries in terms of their rich heritage, their loved brands, and so on and so forth. We wanted to boil this down to some indicators. This is what really people think of when they're thinking of countries with rich heritage. And so what we've got here is 4 key indicators. Having a strong visual identity, having heritage that's preserved, heritage that impacts beyond or has impacted beyond their borders, and heritage that's integral to the experience. Now, nations don't need to do all of these things, but obviously the more of these they do, the stronger they are they have evidence of having that rich heritage. So if nations are doing some of these things, showing some of these things, perceived to have some of these things, that strengthens that consumer perception. So what are these all about? Really, ultimately, having visual identity is really important. People are able to immediately imagine what these countries are like. What is their heritage? What is the culture? You think of this image of Japan there, you might think of pagodas, you think of the culture, you think of the techno, kind of modern cities colliding with that heritage. And so it is for many other countries that rank highly there. People can really clearly visually identify what is that heritage and how it shows up in daily life. Related to that, the heritage is preserved, so long-standing customs, rituals, traditions, and that sort of thing are protected and part of daily life. Even if they might feel like they're outdated, they're preserved because they seem to be important to that nation. Having heritage that impacts beyond their borders, that's easier for some countries than others, but people think of the Renaissance and that sort of thing. You can see by the example in the image there is what people start to think of. Oh, these cultures have impacted how we think about arts, how we think about culture, and so on and so forth. And then heritage being integral to the experience. So people being able to envisage, if I step off a plane, am I going to be fully immersed in this? Am I going to be, is every interaction with people when the cuisine and so on and so forth, is that going to be viscerally bringing to life the heritage of this country or not? If we move on to the next, which is our metric around influence in arts and entertainment, we've got 5 indicators here. And the first one of those is scale, which shouldn't be a surprise, really, whether that's Hollywood, whether that's Bollywood, whether it's sports, whether it's arts and literature, whatever that might be, their scale can't really be ignored. Their output is substantial. It's exported across borders, across languages, and so on. It's really kind of hard to miss, and a real kind of cultural export tool there. Second is that they build the stage, so they're actually creating the kind of arenas for that, and that might be Hollywood, it might be sports leagues, or other elements of arts and entertainment, but actually they are where people who are at the top of their game have to go if they want to succeed. This is where the top athletes go, the top actors want to perform, and so on and so forth. The audiences that you want to break as a musician, that sort of thing. Their culture is unmistakable. Again, people know it when they see it, so they know what an American movie looks like. They know what a Scandi noir might look like, or a British crime thriller, that sort of thing. So it's really clearly anchored and connected to the country of origin. They create cultural shrines and institutions, so they actually celebrate and preserve that, and they kind of present that as something for tourists to come and visit, and something that's of great importance to the country. And they create idols as well. That it's not a coincidence that these people, Taylor Swift or whoever it might be, become so successful. They're actually championed and supported to be that, because they're actually a face of that export, a face of that culture, and that kind of creative side of a given country. And then lastly, in brands and products, and the statement that we wanted to unpick was, has brands and products the world loves. So again, we've got 5 indicators here. The first of which is cultivated expertise. So nations that have become the real benchmark for a particular sector, a particular, I suppose, capability. There's an image there of kind of a German car. So that's a really obvious example for people to draw on. They can say, well, there's a sense of engineering expertise in Germany, or maybe it's Italian design, that sort of thing. But these countries have become the kind of center for excellence, and it's what people benchmark the sectors against. And that kind of perpetuates. People put that down to the people, their kind of nous, whether it's fastidiousness, whether their sense of creativity, or what other thing that they project onto a nation. And then brands and the countries perpetuate that. The brands kind of build on that story and tell that story even more so, and leverage that to build that success. They're sector innovators, the second one here. So countries that are fostering new industries, new sectors. They're disrupting old ones. US and the tech sector and kind of online kind of worlds, that sort of thing is really key there. Now we're talking to everyday consumers, so playing in sectors that excite is really important. It's all great being strong in B2B, but the everyday consumer doesn't really care about that, doesn't really influence a nation's standing, or it's a lot harder to influence a nation's standing unless you're living and breathing in sectors that excite people, whether that's design, whether it's fashion, whether it's technology, and so on and so forth. So sectors that excite, offer some kind of identity to consumers. It's really important. Producing at scale. Scale is obviously a key one through all of this. So having brands that are promoted across borders, really kind of visibly, tangibly, at volume, is really key. And then the last one's a little bit of a new one, a little bit of a new angle here, which is that they're sector facilitators. And why that's new? That's having things like creating new platforms. It might be TikTok, it might be social networks and social platforms, it might be access to new marketplaces. So Temu, Shein, things like that. A sense that they're facilitating new interactions, new platforms for communicating, for building brands and businesses, or for access to goods and services as well. So that's the last of those indicators there. So I guess the question becomes then, what does that mean for New Zealand? How are we performing? How are we perceived? And what does that mean for what next, and how we might sway perceptions on these metrics? So I'll start with where we're seen today as a country before we come back to these metrics specifically. And again, anyone who saw this in 2023 when we presented this work, this slide will look familiar. This is the kind of, I suppose, spontaneous perceptions of people who know New Zealand but haven't visited New Zealand that we spoke to, and what they think of us as a nation, what we're all about, what their associations are. These kind of perceptions don't change fast. These take a long time to build and evolve. So it shouldn't be a surprise that these are similar to last time out. Really, it comes down to three things: the place itself, the produce that comes from here, and the people who kind of who make up the nation. Under the place piece, we've got two things really. We're far flung, we're isolated, we're a small island, far from the rest of the world. Well, quite a large island, but seen as quite a small island with a low population. Part of that leads to some of our equity around bountiful, beautiful, pristine, our natural environments. People want to come and visit our our goods and services are clean, and produce is safe and uncontaminated. So that suggests some real positives. We're self-sufficient, we're decisive, we're community oriented, we're connected to nature, but some shadow sides as well. We're a little bit disconnected. Perhaps we're low influence. Perhaps there are limited opportunities here. Flowing on from that is our produce. We have a fertile agrarian kind of culture. Agriculture is quite central to our economy, our GDP. We're more rural than urban as a nation, and that brings with it lots of good stuff that we've talked about. It also suggests that we might be honest, straightforward, down to earth people. But that low urbanization element, whilst it's great for our produce and our tourism industries, it perhaps suggests that we're low in terms of modernity in industry and sort of technological advancement and the opportunity that goes with that. Our people, we're seeing progressive, humble. There's a sense that we're quite liberal. There's some hint that perhaps we've got some good integration with Maori compared to other nations and their indigenous relationships. We don't interfere, or we're not seen to be involved in and interfered in some of the other conflicts that are going on around the world. We're laid back. We seem to be friendly, passionate about the outdoors, and quite relaxed, friendly, open, and welcoming people. So it suggests we're progressive, we're ethically minded, we're culturally tolerant, we're diverse. But again, there's a sense that, well, if we're laid back, maybe we're low influence and low aspiration, which might mean low momentum and low opportunity. All in all, quite positive, but you can start to see where some of the kind of challenges that we might want to build are emerging. Excuse me. So let's bring it to our soft power metrics. In a very quick summary here, this is spontaneous associations really on these things. Rich heritage, Maori culture sparks interest. That's, I suppose, the key takeout of all of this. It's a really important piece of the puzzle. But the knowledge is really quite light. There are some aesthetics that people kind of associate with Maori culture and how that might show up. But it's quite limited as to how exactly that shows up in everyday life. In terms of influential in arts and entertainment, we're mostly seen as a backdrop. Movies might be made here. We've got lovely scenery that can be a backdrop, but people aren't really clearly linking a lot of productions and output that's uniquely New Zealand and sort of talking about the sector, knowing about the sector that exists here in movies and entertainment. And then in products and brands the world loves, we're known for our trusted produce and certain key sectors, but brands in terms of how well people can attribute those to New Zealand are thin on the ground. And I'll talk about all of that in detail now. So we've got a bit of a traffic light summary here, market by market. So we can start to see where the strength of association is strongest. I guess the first observation is that there's a fair bit of red on here and some kind of amber. Spontaneously, and we did go on to have conversations with consumers where we showed a lot of examples in all these areas, and I'll talk about how that was received as we go. But spontaneously, the association, the ability for people to play back brands, people, performers, strength in these sectors is represented on this chart here in its simplest form. You can see, obviously, there is a stronger understanding in those markets that are closer to us culturally, geographically, Australia and the UK, a little bit more in the US as well. And then the greatest strength is around China and Singapore in the sense of, in the area of products and brands the world loves, which are obviously our key trading partners, where we can see, we know that we export something in our equity is really strong. There we see some stronger kind of sense of association there. Let's tackle each of these in turn and see what's behind this. So if we look at rich heritage firstly, there's a real divide there, I suppose. Essentially, Australia and the UK, obviously a great a greater sense of connection culturally. Colonial history is shared, tie back to the motherland is the same. The UK, being the kind of the colonizer of both nations, so that relationship there, being part of the Commonwealth, that sort of thing. There is understandably a slightly greater awareness of the knowledge of our culture here. There is a little bit of sense that Maori culture is a little bit better kind of integrated in society. Particularly that was called out in Australia in a contrast to their own kind of sense of how they perform in that regard. And the UK knew that as well, as being a little bit more, I suppose, integrated into society there. Whereas in the US and then the other Asian markets, that's a lot less well known. There are sprinklings across the conversations that we had that we think Maori culture is kind of part of the culture here, but part of the society, part of life here, but not really sure how that what that looks like, how that shows up. And really the sense is that it's a European culture, it's a Pākehā culture. That's the dominant experience in New Zealand. If you were to get off a plane here, that's what people might expect to be the dominant experience in those markets. So if we bring it back to our indicators on rich heritage and sort of, I guess, bring it back to why people think about New Zealand as the way they do. Look, our strong visual identity, it's not uniquely recognizable as being a unique culture that people can envisage. People can imagine our mountains, our lakes, our beautiful kind of empty, pristine lands that they might want to come and visit. But when it comes to talking about and imagining our culture and what makes it unique, people find that a little bit difficult to do so. It's not completely unique in terms of what people can imagine makes it different from, say, Australia or even the UK in terms of our cities and how we live and that sort of thing. Preserving our heritage, as I said, there is some very low level ideas that Māori culture is a little bit more present in society, but not necessarily very well understood as to how that shows up. It's not easy for people to conjure up tangible examples, so there's more work to do that to make that more present. Heritage impacting beyond our borders, obviously that's something that we're going to struggle with a little bit, being a young and isolated island nation. And then connected to that visual identity, the sense that our heritage is integral to the kind of lived experience that people have here. People do not envisage that as the experience in New Zealand. So that's something that we could, I think, make more of, really, to showcase and kind of build into people's perceptions. So the key takeout from all of this really is that the opportunity is to grow, I suppose, awareness and understanding of our Māori heritage and our shared bicultural heritage, really. There's awareness of Māori culture, and people across all these groups, it was a theme across all of them in all nations, was I want to know more. That's what makes you unique. New Zealand's a young colonized nation, but it doesn't have that culturally driven way of life, but you do have something that's really interesting in Māori culture and that sets you apart as a country, and a country that embraces that. But actually finding tangible kind of prominent examples of how that shows up and impacts daily life is really limited and a difficult struggle for people. There are some identifiable cues, the haka, tā moko, connection to nature. They're really important. They're kind of associations people have with New Zealand, and it's seen as a bit of a cultural anchor. That's the bit that makes you unique, New Zealand. I want to see more of that, but there are limited examples. So it's of unique interest. Everybody wanted to see more and learn more and know about that, and was amazed when we showed examples of how that shows up. So the understanding is limited, but the appetite is absolutely there to know more, and a real kind of platform to build differentiation as to what we're all about. Now, without going through a million examples, we shared on the call today, we shared with consumers a lot of different dimensions to our heritage, both Māori and Pākehā, but the European heritage as well as that, but as well as Māori culture. So it wasn't all Māori culture. But what really stood out to people is the kind of examples you can see listed here under each of these. But what's really interesting, what really connected with people, all started to cluster back to really 4 ideas. One is that we're proud of our culture, we're proud of our people, we're proud of our history and our heritage, and it's a shared heritage. So things like, an example where we talked about the America's Cup boat being accompanied by a waka to the starting line in the America's Cup, use of te reo in everyday life, that sort of thing, shows that we're a nation that's proud of our culture. Doing things with intent as well. So we actually have intent to preserve this. And there were examples you can see there that brought that to life and said, right, you're actually really making efforts to do this. That's really important. That's really interesting and distinctive. It's a bicultural history. It's shared, it is, the history is what it is. And we both exist here, Māori, Pākehā, and other cultures as well exist here, but showing that we're a mindset and a nation that embraces that, embracing different worldviews. Not just Western worldviews, but Māori worldviews as well. It is a really important, point of difference to people when they look at New Zealand. And then lastly, that it reflects our values, that it reflects the values of who we are, things that people did know about, but also kind of ties up nicely with our kind of liberal, open-minded worldview there. So it reflects what people think we are as a country. So just to sum that up quickly, our heritage is seen as primarily European. A visit to New Zealand isn't necessarily seen to be uniquely culturally immersive, bit of a sort of Australia light. Our brands, our arts, culture, and that sort of thing seem to be lacking, and we'll talk about those more in a minute. But Māori culture is a valuable point of difference, but it's only seen in glimpses. So people really, what it means is they're really interested in seeing more of this. It's the key to our rich heritage. Bicultural society needs to be really visible and tangible for people to better understand it. And that means championing voices and platforms and showing it in our infrastructure that represents that shared heritage. And embracing that shared history is what's going to be a driver for our perceptions there. Okay, so let's talk about arts and entertainment. A little bit more amber on this one. The US the audiences were able to tie a little bit more back to New Zealand. But again, still green, still no green on here. Australia, even in Australia and the UK, I was surprised actually by how little attribution some of our biggest kind of stars and success stories were in terms of being able to be tied back to New Zealand. Even people we cite as great examples of a Kiwi succeeding on a global stage, people like Lorde, a lot of people saying, oh, I thought she was British, or I thought she was American. So that connection back to New Zealand is a little bit of a challenge for us, despite having a lot of success in a lot of different sectors. In Asia, we see a bit more of a cultural barrier there, obviously a language barrier, but also a cultural barrier as well, in a sense that when we show people, oh, right, I know those people, but I just sort of lump them into the kind of bucket of Western performers, not necessarily from, New Zealand or America or wherever else, they might be from. So there's a much bigger barrier in those markets, unfortunately. But even in the markets that we're much closer to, there is some kind of challenge in terms of connection. So how we perform on our indicators, scale that can't be ignored. Well, obviously we're lacking volume in that kind of sense. It's hard to compete with the music industries, the movie industries, and so on of other nations. Even though we've got our success stories, scale is always going to be a challenge for us. Of course, we're not building the stage. We're not hosting the biggest leagues or the biggest industries at the moment. So we're obviously not able to do that very easily. Our culture is unmistakable. That's somewhere where we can start to build, however, building something, whether it's around Maori, culture, whether it's around bicultural kind of storytelling, that sort of thing. There is something that we can play on there. And there's a sense that Maori culture, as I said, is something that's a point of uniqueness for New Zealand. Creating cultural shrines and institutions. Look, we don't have the venues that compete with the Louvre or the Met or whatever it might be. So we don't have those to the same scale and to the same kind of awareness. Unfortunately, we could champion those, but obviously scale is a kind of a factor there as well. And we're not creating cultural idols that are tangibly linked back to New Zealand and New Zealand culture to the extent that some of these other nations are able to do so. So next slide, if it will move on. Okay, so what are the big learnings here? I suppose the big takeout here, because we went into this conversation thinking we've got a lot of success stories. We've got a lot of performers who we think are well known. They're having success. They're being recognized on the biggest stages. They're playing in the biggest leagues and winning Oscars and all this sort of other stuff. Surely we should be seen as influential in arts and entertainment. But the big takeout is participation doesn't equal influence. Whilst there's some surprise at the breadth of Kiwi presence in these sectors, what we've found is that those are individual success stories. Those are not New Zealand success stories. Just because you've got one person doing great in one sector doesn't mean you've got influence at a greater scale. That's just an individual story. The second part to it is that there isn't a clear through line to New Zealand. There are performers and players and that sort of thing that are kind of winning and thriving and succeeding, but that connection back to New Zealand, or lack thereof, means that it doesn't impact the sense of influence that New Zealand as a nation has on these sectors. So really, that recognition of global kind of influence in arts and entertainment really comes from sectors, not necessarily individuals. So consistent sector performance and attribution is really what's key. No, excuse me. So what did we hear? We heard that mostly we're known for our kind of landscapes and backdrops in the entertainment industry rather than kind of what we produce. In Asia, our stars don't cut through as being particularly unique. Our successful Kiwis that we think of as, real success stories, they are success stories, but they're few and disparate and they're across a lot of different sectors. So they don't easily coalesce into a sector story, a national sector story for people in consumer minds. Many of our successes are also behind the scenes. You think about visual arts, that sort of thing. Great success, great strength. But not things that are very consumer visible, or they're in sectors and sports that are relatively niche. And we're not seen as the originator of any kind of host, for different platforms, genres, or styles. So what it means is individual success stories don't pay back like established visible sectors. And that's what we really need to drive. That's what we really need to invest in. We need to show what we can originate and create, not just what we can emulate. Just because we can make a movie as well as Hollywood doesn't mean that we're actually originating anything new. So we need to kind of showcase what we're doing that's new. And it requires attribution. Obviously, consumers must know it when they see it, know that a New Zealand movie or music or whatever that might be, whatever the platform might be, can build back attribution to New Zealand in order to build equity. Lastly, then, is products and brands. And you can see a little bit more green here. So Australia and the UK, obviously well known in terms of key sectors. So lots of people were able to play back, New Zealand lamb, Sauvignon Blanc, that sort of thing. Excuse me, and some key sectors there. But then stronger in China and Singapore, obviously key trade partners and countries that buy into our produce because of what it is, because of its unique equity, being safe, being pure, being clean, being unadulterated, that sort of thing. It's really kind of powerful in those markets. So they were thankfully able to play that back to us and give us great richness in terms of what they know of our output. We bring it back to our indicators then. We've got cultivated expertise. Look, mainly that's in the primary industries. We're not really known beyond that. That's obviously a really valuable element of our economy and our kind of identity, but it's relatively limited to just primary industries in the minds of consumers today. Sector innovation, again, there is some innovation that was recognised, but when we showed examples, it was seen as innovative. But again, as we saw in arts and entertainment, not easily attributed back to New Zealand, unfortunately. They play in sectors that excite. So New Zealand is lacking brands that are visible, that really excite consumers. So we have lots of great things that people are interested in, but they're not really exciting sectors in the minds of consumers. Not easily able to say, you're doing really exciting stuff that, I look forward to the new launch of X or that sort of thing. Again, scale is obviously going to be a bit of a problem for us. We can't compete on quite the same scale, and we're not facilitating new sectors by and large, the likes of the way US and Chinese brands and platforms are, unfortunately. Excuse me, everybody. So I'll come back to that primary industries piece because that's the real strength and that's the real story. It is a real strength for us. It's what New Zealand is best known for, and it's a real strength for our equity from a tourism perspective, from a produce perspective. That kind of cleanliness, that purity, that kind of simplicity of New Zealand life is a great important part of our equity, but it can be seen as a bit of a ceiling in terms of what we do. If that's kind of what you're well known for, where's the rest is the question that consumers ask. And look, there's lots of innovation that we could showcase, and something like Agritech might be a natural next step to build on and story to tell on that. But really, everyday consumers, want to see things that show up in their everyday life. The perception is that primary industry is a kind of given for nations. It's something that obviously every nation needs. Every nation needs to be able to feed itself, and if you can, then export some of that as well, which is great. But all the wealth and stability that comes from that should then flow into culture, creativity, brands, and that sort of thing. And people want to see that, and they're not sure where that is today, as we've seen with the previous metrics there. They're not sure what that looks like for New Zealand and where that shows up. So they want to see that, but they want to see what has kind of resulted in all the wealth that we've got here naturally, and what we've done with that. So what have we heard? We've heard that consumers only know our produce rather than our brands. Even if they are known brands, and there were a lot of known brands once we showed them, they're not always associated with New Zealand and therefore don't pay back to the perception of our nation brand. Many successful examples that we showed are also B2B, so they don't really tangibly impact consumers' lives in a way that they're aware of. But what we did see was, and something that we saw in the 2023 work around science and innovation as well, is a thread of care, a unique platform in the New Zealand examples that we shared. There's a unique identity there around quality, craftsmanship, care, minimizing impact. That is something that we can really build on and makes sense and has a lot of credibility for New Zealand. So what it means is, again, we need scale and promotion. Easier said than done, I am aware of that. But obviously scale and promotion is what really kind of drives this onto consumers' radars. Driving nation equity, we need to have products and brands that demonstrate clear connection to New Zealand. It requires multiple examples of this, as it does in arts and entertainment. We need sector expertise. We need brands doing this repeatedly over time with scale. And consumers need to see consumers can see that thread of care about process and impact and sustainability through the examples we shared. So there's a great platform there that works really nicely with our story. But really, to cut through the noise, we need to be producing brands that have uniqueness and impact and come from a culture that people are really wanting to buy into, because that's what this is really all about. People want to buy American brands because they want to buy a piece of the culture. And so for us, it's about showing, well, what is our culture? What are our values? And what are the brands look like that grow from there? Excuse me. So just to try and draw it all together before we wrap up and have some Q&A, it's a question as to, I suppose, so what, now what? When we started this work, we had a question as to how connected these three ideas are. Amy showed you at the start the many different metrics that are measured in the brand finance soft power work that they do, lots of them. And we felt that rich heritage, influence in arts and entertainment, and having products and brands that the world loves are really kind of disconnected, and they're three separate conversations we're going to have with consumers. But what felt really clear to us by the time we'd had the conversations is that they're incredibly entwined, and everything starts with heritage, everything starts with culture. That's our history, that's our culture, not just ours, every nation. It's the nation's culture, shared experiences and beliefs. That's the heritage of a country. It informs, therefore, everything that flows from it. It informs how people behave. It informs the arts and entertainment that is basically a storytelling device for that heritage. It reflects the experiences that we've had, the culture, the aesthetics, how things look or sound or feel that evolve out of that heritage. So arts and entertainment then becomes the storytelling platform for that. It's an expression of culture, heritage, and our character. And it's an outward reflection that we put to the world. And so it's a really important platform for showing who we are and telling our heritage story. And then products and brands can build on that as well. They can leverage that. That's a modern extension or a capitalistic monetizing that arts and entertainment and that culture. It's saying this is who we are. This is our skill set. These are the people that we are, the culture that we come from. And that's, this is the products and the kind of skill sets and the outputs that result from that. So these are incredibly entwined, and it really starts at the top there with heritage. So where is New Zealand today? Working around that same triangle, we can see, just to very quickly summarize, some paraphrase what I've talked about for the last 20 minutes, New Zealand's distinctive and differentiating heritage is anchored. Really, the point of difference is in Māori culture and bicultural society. That's where we start to feel different to Australia, to UK, and other similar countries, or culturally similar countries or Western nations. Our economy is perceived as very agriculture heavy, which is great in lots of ways, but it's seen to be therefore low visibility in terms of innovation. So there's something we can build upon there. In terms of arts and entertainment, we struggle with scale. That's always going to be a challenge for us, of course. And our international successes that we do have are hard to link back to New Zealand. And similarly for products and brands, we have a challenge with cut through and scale, which makes sector equity really challenging for us in the mind of everyday consumers. We do have, some interesting points to build upon in terms of our national identity, but it currently struggles a little bit to coalesce and crystallize in the minds of consumers. So there is kind of a need for better recognition in terms of our cultural narratives. If we sort of invert the triangle a little bit and build bottom up here, really creating equity on these metrics is really starting with that unique culture. All of that starts with influence that comes from a reputation that has been built through repeated behaviors, repeatedly showcasing what we are, who we are, what we produce, what we do, what products and services and brands and entertainment look like from New Zealand. And when Amy talks at the start about soft power, it's really about building influence. That's what we're trying to build here. And if you start with unique heritage and culture, that leads to a unique, distinct arts and entertainment that people want to have a piece of, and can bring that back to New Zealand. They can recognize it as coming from and being of New Zealand. That's where it's really important. It's unique, it's aspirational, it's interesting to people. It has clear values or worldview that people want to be a part of. And that flows through from our culture into our arts and entertainment and through to our brands and services. So what can we do to bridge the gaps? There's obviously a lot of work to do. This is not an easy fix, of course. Obviously, this is something that's built over a long time in the minds of consumers. But if we are to do it, we need to do three things. Really, one is nurturing a unique culture that people recognise are interested in. So that means really consistently building and promoting an image of New Zealand's bicultural society and the values to shape a distinct image in consumers' minds. The second piece is showcasing it with our arts and entertainment. reflecting the culture and identity that we have here in New Zealand that's unique and different. That means investing in bringing to life that cultural richness so that we can then export that as an expression of our culture, our values, who we are. And then lastly, obviously growing brands that benefit from that unique reputation that's created, brands that share the values and that can be recognised, that are recognisable, can be attributed to New Zealand. Really, that's about championing brands that leverage those beliefs, values, and traits, and leverage a point of difference that pays back to New Zealand, so people can see these brands stand for this, and that's because they come from New Zealand and what New Zealand is all about. And just last couple of slides then, just to sum up before we have some question and answers. If we think about the rich heritage piece, really it's all about growing our culture to grow our reputation. And these points, these bullet points here, link back to those indicators around each of these metrics. And for heritage, really, it's about preserving. It's about that indicator around preserving our shared culture and showing that we go to lengths to share that and celebrate it. Making the bicultural experience integral to life in New Zealand, so people feel when they do come here, that is the experience they're going to encounter, and continuing to promote and build distinctive visual cues, so people can really kind of actually visualize that, know what it looks like, know what it feels like, and kind of imagine what they might experience when they come here, when they buy our goods and services. Making sure that we're proud. It's seen that we are proud and intentional in our behaviours here, in our embrace of bicultural history, because of the values and who we are. And that's obviously key then to embracing to establishing a point of view that's different around arts and entertainment and brands. In the arts and entertainment angle then, it's really about reflecting who we are and how we want to be seen. The key metrics there, the indicators there, is really about ensuring our culture outputs are really unmistakable. People know them when they see them. They know they're from New Zealand. Knowing that we actively celebrate and protect our culture, that's something we need to do, and behaviours we need to exhibit in order to build that perception. And then obviously celebrating people, stories, and aesthetics that embody what's unique to us. So arts and entertainment is exports that tell our story of our identity. So showcasing those is what will fuel demand for New Zealand. And then lastly, around brands, I guess the key thing here really is around, once you've established that culture and equity in consumers' mind, the brand's power will follow and flow on from that. And this is really important because we've had conversations this year, but also last year when we talked about, in particular, sustainability, an area where we've got credibility in building expertise here. There are other nations that are looking for help with innovation around sustainable approaches. It's something that nations are going to see and want more and more of increasingly, and it's a sense that consumers feel is not being done enough of in their own countries, and wish that countries did more around the sustainability piece in particular. So doing things with care and minimal impact really fits with our perceived values as New Zealanders, and is a really unique platform for telling a unique brand story as well. So 2 more slides and we'll do a Q&A. I suppose the last thing is probably no surprise here to you from what I've said here, and it may sound really obvious. Really, everything that we need to do to drive consistency and distinctiveness is really about visibility, doing things that are really intangibly linked to New Zealand. People are, clear that they are from New Zealand when they see our outfit. They know it. It's ownable. It's distinct. It's something that could only be from New Zealand, and it's repeated. It's established over time. People see this time and time again, and therefore are able to attribute those to New Zealand because and establish that equity because they're seeing it again and again out of New Zealand, clearly tied to New Zealand. And the last slide from me before we have Q&A is really just to draw it together with what we heard last year. We thought, as I said, we were having quite a different conversation this year than in 2023 when we talked about science and technology, sustainability, space, metrics that are in the minds of consumers, all of the similar world. But actually what we found is, as I said, a really important connected conversation that ultimately comes back to the same idea, which is, essentially care for people and place. Our cultural values are really what's at the heart of any of this, whether it's talking about arts and entertainment, whether it's about technology and space and whatever else it might be. Embracing that heritage is a reflection of our values, and that care for people and places in our DNA, and that kind of flows through to all of these other sectors. And it's a really great platform for us to tell a unique nation brand story. So that's it from me. I'm aware that I've talked a lot through there, so we'll have an opportunity for questions in a minute, but I'll throw it back to David.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Josh. As you can all see, there's some pretty impressive amount of work that's gone into this research study, and we've got a whole bunch of questions and answers we'll come back to shortly. Just to finish out the presentation, I guess it goes back to kind of the purpose of having an organisation like New Zealand Story. We help to curate the brand of New Zealand and make sure that people can increase their international influence, their exports, whatever it might be, however you define value, through distinctiveness, so showcasing New Zealand, through showcasing our culture. And as Josh said, there's plenty of opportunity for us to do that. One way that I would absolutely suggest is using the Fernmark. I would say this is like a little word from our sponsor, but essentially the Fernmark licensing program is a way that you can, as a company, you can get access to use the Fernmark to prove the country of origin from New Zealand. And some markets, as you see there, but we know very well that some markets is a very important attribute that people value, that things come from New Zealand, particularly in that food and beverage space, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, etc. So we've got a strong country brand, and the Fernmark is the way that you can attach yourself to it. And I might hand over to you, Amy, to close us out with a finishing karakia.
Yeah,
Tātou.
great. Thanks, David. And thanks everyone for attending. So I will close us out with the karakia whakamutanga. Again, this beautiful karakia was composed by Stacey and Scotty Morrison for New Zealand Story Group. So we're really, really excited to share it with you here today. Ko te mana o ēnei kōrero ka noho ki konei. Ko nā whakaparirotanga o ēnei kōrero ka rere i te hau e mā hirikapu e manaaki. Mā tātou e titi kia ngākau tūwhera. He whakaawinga mō tō tātou anamata. Toi tū te kōrero, toi tū te wānanga, toi tū te Aotearoatanga. Whenua tauri kora, whenua tau e te kora, tau mai te kotahitanga, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e.
Yeah.